Let me just share my screen. Hi, everyone. My name is Renee Ebanks, and I am the program manager of the Alex Panton Foundation. And today we are joined by three lovely speakers. We okay with see my notes? Everything's good? Yeah? Okay, great. And yeah, so we are going to go ahead and start, and we're talking about men's mental health today in honor of International Men's Day, which is today. So yay! And the whole month is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So we just want to highlight the importance of focusing on men's mental health. And we're going to begin now. So I'm just going to go through the introduction with you all, or the agenda, I should say. So we're going to introduce the speakers. But before we go into our panel discussion, we're going to give a definition of what mental health is so you have a basis of where we're coming from. Then we're going to go into our panel discussion as well as some Q&A so that you, the audience, can ask some questions around what's being discussed, as well as some resources are available to you on Island. And then I ask you to stay at the end so you can complete the feedback survey. Okay? All right. So with that being said, let us go ahead and introduce our speakers. So we start off with Mr. Cottrell Ellis.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cottrell Ellis. I am a mental health counselor at the prison, Northwood Prison. Um, I've been counseling there for a few months now. It's very good, a whole new experience. And I'm a Caymanian, passionate about mental health on the island and trying to pioneer and influence the youth, males, the entire island in general. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Cottrell. Mr. Willis, you want to go ahead?
Afternoon. Hi, my name's Willis Atherley-Bourne. I've arrived in Cayman. I'm relative. I've been told I'm young, apparently, or fresh is the other word that's been used. So I arrived in Cayman March of this year. My background is counselling psychotherapy with children and adults, and I'm based here at the Counselling Centre in Georgetown. I'm really looking forward to talking about masculinities and also mental health. So I'm looking forward to this afternoon.
Thank you. And Hilton, you want to go ahead?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hilton Grace. I have worked in various settings here in the Cayman Islands over a number of years with boys and men and looking at mental health. Currently, I work in the prison along with Cottrell, right? It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon talking about mental health. So we'll talk a little bit more and we'll see how this afternoon goes.
Okay, great. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And before we go on to the questions or the panel discussion, as I said, I want to talk about what mental health is. Okay, so let's define what mental health is first for everyone to have an idea of where we're coming from. Okay, so according to the World Health Organization, mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual achieves their potential, copes with the normal stresses of life, works productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So mental health includes our emotional, our psychological, which is our thinking, as well as our social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. So basically, mental health is in everything that we do, okay? So, like physical health, it's important to know that we all have mental health, right? Sometimes people get confused between what mental health versus what mental illness or mental health disorders are. So, one, we all have mental health, but sometimes our life experiences, our genetics, our social upbringing, our psychological factors, they do determine whether we develop a mental illness, okay? But we all have mental health, okay? And as you can see here, it could range across the spectrum from healthy to unwell, and it can fluctuate on a daily basis and change over time. So it's on a continuum. It can go from healthy to unwell, and then you have your middle parts of coping and struggling as well. Okay, so I want you all to start thinking of some questions too while we go through this, and feel free to put that in the chat while we have this panel discussion too, so we can have those questions to refer back to at the end of the conversation. Okay, so now time for our panel discussion. Okay, so I put each question up so everyone can see what we're asking, as well as just having a reference if you're joining in at a different time or need to step away. Okay, so the first question we're going to ask is, considering that you all work within the fields of mental health, from your experience, what have you noticed to be the most common concerns that men face today in the Cayman Islands and elsewhere? And a sub part of that question is, what support is missing for men to succeed? So, Mr. Willis, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. So what do I see? So I think some of the things that I see and hear from men and young boys is that information isn't always accessible, or information isn't, accessible in terms of the language, the tone that's being used. Sometimes it's quite medicalized, it's quite technical or academic. So there's something about when we talk about depression, what do we mean by depression? When I think of depression, I work with someone, we try to define it. I may use the image of a ball, and the ball is filled with air, so they have bounce. And when someone is depressed, let's call that being deflated. The ball doesn't have the bounce that it would usually have. And so we need to, be able to pump some air back in to give the ball back some more bounce. So that's a really simple way of putting it, but quite often those ways are quite accessible for men. I think the other thing I'm thinking about here in terms of Cayman in particular is I think it's about the services and how flexible they can be. So, you've got someone who's working particularly long hours, then all of those things become very difficult for men to access support over the weekends, later into the evening. So these are just some basic access issues beyond the information issue.
Right. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to pass this on to Cottrell. Cottrell, how would you answer this question?
Uh, Based on my experience, I think two things stands out to me. I think the lack of values that a lot of the men carry uh here throughout the island and probably worldwide as well. Two, I think the worldwide component to it is I think there's a rise in loneliness when it comes to men. Um, I don't know if you guys know Scott Galloway. Recently, he been coming up a lot about notes on being a man and the loneliness crisis that men are facing, particularly due to lack of connection, lack of drive to seek out certain connection, a lack of drive to even date and find companionships. And I observe that it's happening a lot, particularly in the prison where mental health. If you even if you're in a good state, you can still seek mental health, just to maintain that purpose. But mental health for a lot of men too is still being perceived as well, you crazy, or only if something is wrong that you seek that type of service, and it's a barrier. So I definitely think those three things are definitely components that are hindering men from accessing services and issues that are facing men at the moment.
Thank you so much for that. And Hilton, how would you answer this question?
So some of the things that I'm seeing is men not being able to deal with relationship discord, um, also struggling with issues of shame, as well as quite a number now are starting to look at the issue of sexual trauma associated with men, and then again also being at the prison, we are starting to see some of these things, as well as Cottrell said, in terms of some of the values, some of the men are reflecting on issues of success. What does that mean for them? And if I am in my mid or my late 30s and I'm in prison, you know Can I really fit back into society? And those are some of those real questions that they have to ask. In terms of, I think Willis spoke to the issue of access. That's absolutely important in terms of making spaces available for our men to be able to access after hours. And we also framing the language in something that they can relate to and understand. Just up here, again, as we frame this issue of masculinity, as men here, our unique challenges are they're prominent among us in terms of risky behaviors, in terms of a general mistrust of the system and also the fear of being ridiculed if you access the mental health care, because then we're told that we ought to be strong and to use an expression from Jamaica, the idea man must hold up them stress. Right? So those are some of the issues. So again, in terms of our socialization, um, not many examples of going out to seek help. We get a cut, we unless the hand is falling off, we don't necessarily seek help. And so those are some of the general challenges, etc., that are important for us to look at as we examine this issue of mental health and masculinity.
Yes, it's absolutely true. And I'm sharing a slide here too that looks at impact of masculinity and general behaviors, like limited engagement, like less socialized to promote and maintain their own health, as you're talking about, right? Not noticing signs of illness. And if they do they seek healthcare at a time that could be preventable, right? Or can help with prevention. Late diagnoses of treatable illnesses, right? Again, the mind and body are all connected in this way. And then looking at increased disabilities among men, as we talked about, some accidents within their jobs. And this can lead to premature death and male suicide and depression. So I think it's so important that you all talked about, having values, what that looks like, as well as the language that that is used to communicate to men about what mental health is. Again, it may be foreign to some men, especially with that whole stigma attached to seeking help for it. So yes, thank you so much for that. So Hilton, I'm going to stay on you for the second question, okay? All right. So how would you define masculinity today or modern masculinity versus previous generations?
Firstly, there's not much difference between either, and I'm going to tell you why. So, masculinity is a way of being manly. Of course, it is a social construct, but it's a very important one. When we look at our grandfathers, and even in the Cayman context, for example, men were required to go to sea, right? So that within itself, we're talking about at least three qualities in particular: physical strength, courage, risk taking. Okay, this is the previous generation, but it is the same for us currently. But we'll have to look at how we broaden that to see how we look at it within this modern era, because strength, courage, and risk taking may take very different shapes in today's society. We also talk about being man in terms of attitude, never back down, or being the alpha, right? And then there's also those physical traits, being athletic, being physically strong, knowing that at any minute you could defend your family. So those have not really changed. And from my opinion, they ought not to change. They ought to be expanded, because within this modern era, what should strength look like? It should include emotional strength. One of the things that we start to see now is, men being made up by their daughters, right? Our grandfathers would never stand for that, right? But it's about expanding men's emotional connection to children, to the community. Again, courage may not mean, jumping out to go war. It might mean speaking about an emotional vulnerability, right? As well as other kinds of risk taking. So I don't see a lot of difference between the previous generation in terms of what is defined, but for our modern times, we require that expansion, which includes that emotional development, that connectedness to people, using the same kind of quality of strength, courage, risk-taking, etc. We don't all need to be physically strong, but our strength can be exuded elsewhere in terms of our eloquence, in terms of our service to community, etc. So broadening those. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Can you just repeat the last sentence? Because I think your Wi-Fi tripped out a little bit. Can you just repeat that for us?
No,
Yeah.
no. So I was saying that in terms of the physical strength, it doesn't mean that we are going to go attack a tiger or jump off
Hmm.
somewhere. It could mean really service to community or strength in terms of eloquence and serving others. So again, it is about expanding those general traits and qualities to include that emotional development, which makes us more humane versus our grandfathers who were basically Iron Men, right?
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm going to pass this question to Willis as well. I'm just going to ask for those who are joining the call just to make sure that you are on mute as well, okay? Um, okay, so let's move on to Willis, what your answer would be. I think you have a really interesting take on this question, Willis, and you have an interesting theory that you could talk to us about. So go ahead.
So all of what, I think someone's microphone's on. All of what Hilton had said, I agree with again. And so I think from my perspective, I come in as a psychotherapist and obviously as a male. So when I'm looking at some of my work and study has been from what's called a Jungian psychoanalytical perspective. And in that respect, we talk about archetypes. So what Hilton has referred to fits into some of the archetypes. So an archetype is a template or a blueprint that almost forms or predicts or connects behaviors. Okay, so it doesn't totally define, but it gives us a reference point for our behaviors. So those are archetypes. From a Jungian perspective, then, what we're also suggesting, according to Jung, is that we have what's called the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious is this part of our psyche, our sense of community as men, also just as human beings. We think of it from a gender-specific domain in terms of masculinity. There are certain things that, Jung came up with 12 particular archetypes, and there's a writer called Robert Moore who wrote a book called King, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And the next template, Renee, if that's possible, the next slide.
Yeah, before we move on, I think someone
Yeah.
still is not muted, so I'm just going to ask them
Okay.
to mute, okay?
Okay.
I think we're good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Good.
Okay,
All right.
great.
So thank you. So yeah. So Robert Moore, he expanded the work from Jung. Jung was very, very, very far back in the day. Robert Moore did a piece of work in the 1990s in North America. So Robert Moore, he came up with 4 archetypes out of the 12. The 4 that he came up with, he defined them as the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And each of those have what we call passive and active domains, which are at the bottom of each of the triangles. I'm not going to get too deep into those right here now. What we're going to do is go to the next slide, because what we're doing here within the Department of Counselling is a piece of work whereby we're taking Robert Moore's work and beginning to think about it from a Cayman perspective and from the region. So it's thinking about what does it mean for the history of people within Cayman who have, we have slavery in our background, we have colonization in our background, we have all these dimensions there. So we have to think about this differently within the Cayman context. So Renee, if we could go to the next, I'll go a bit deeper, please. Yeah. Okay. So we've done a relatively small piece of work. So we took the original slide that you saw before, king, warrior, magician, lover, And we've begun a series of conversations. We're going to be doing this over the next year and longer, whereby we're looking to engage with the community, with men, for them to begin to define what the king means for them, what the warrior means for them. And that's going to be based on their experiences. And again, it's building on the strengths of men across the Cayman Islands, where we're also building on those oral traditions of storytelling, passing down information from one generation to the next. So something that Hilton spoke about in terms of, men going out to sea and being seafarers, we don't do that anymore. So how do men have rites of passage from boyhood into manhood? And so these are the gaps that are forming. Also, we have this, across the region, and this is, again, let's call it colonialism and slavery, if we want to go into the history of these things, where, fathers being present within the home was not something that we have done traditionally. We parent differently here in the region. And so to have a household where there's a father and a mother and their children all together all of the time isn't something that happens often. So boys quite often will grow into men without having those male role models of each of these archetypes. So if we look at them, the king, according to Robert Moore, that the qualities of the king, the positive qualities of the king, is someone who demonstrates wisdom, fairness, integrity, responsibility, and also is a decisive leader, the head of the household. And with each of these characters now, there's what we call the passive and the active side. So the passive side might be, the active side may be the bully. So the bully within the household now might be someone who is doing things for their own self-interest. They're exploitative of others and they are abusive. This sounds like domestic abuse. Yeah. The other side then is where the king rather, is seen to be anxious, fearful, insecure. And all of these things are being played out from a position of being a mature man, when actually these dimensions here are from the boy that hasn't formed fully. He hasn't had the rites of passage to grow into his manhood. And so these are the dimensions. We're going to move along to the warrior, and I'm really sorry for this. This is a sprint through this area. I can give references later on via Renee, but it's something that we can explore further. So let me go on to the warrior. The qualities of the warrior. The warrior is the protector. He is disciplined, motivating, strategic, and loyal. So when we talk about someone who is thinking ahead and being the protector, then being the protector doesn't mean you've got the biggest chest in the town. It just means that you think about your power, you use it with moderation to encourage and promote the well-being of others. It is not about self-interest and exerting power over others. Again, if we think of that from the below the triangle here, the Punisher, again, is the person who's going to be cruel. They're exploitative again and abusive. So again, these are those really negative aspects. And the warrior may be that person again within domestic abusive situations, or where we have coercive control over families and dynamics, where they are exerting a lot of power. The other aspect of this is from the warrior, they inflict pain. And they present as being quite powerless. They are powerless, so they exert power over others. Yeah. And they are quite often cowardly. So again, these are those people who will be perhaps quite bigger than others, or be more forceful in their conversations and their presentation than others, and they exert that power over them. I'm aware of time, so we really are running through this. So any questions or comments, write them down and we'll come back to them later on. The next, in Robert Moore's work, the magician is from quite a European perspective. So as we said, we're trying to look at this from a Cayman perspective. So the words are beginning to shift already. So the magician, from where we're coming from and what people have said to us, that the magician becomes the healer. So the healer is the person who has knowledge. They're a deep thinker. They are reflective in what they do. They're emotionally stable. They guide transformation. And in some spaces, this person could be a teacher, could be a therapist, could be a doctor. It's someone who uses their knowledge to support the transformation of others into their best self. Again, like in the other archetypes, there are other aspects of the active and the passive. So the active in this aspect here with the healer would be what we'd call the spin doctor. They withhold information, they overthink, they don't perform, they don't include others, and they're quite isolated. So they take the knowledge of others to feed their own sense of self-worth rather than supporting those other individuals to grow into the men and the young contributory young people that they can be, young men they can be. The other side of the healer is what we're referring to as the clown. And the clown is quite often their behavior is based upon envy. They avoid responsibility and they feel lifeless and they're not quite actually connected to others. So I'm throwing quite a lot out there. So please make your notes and we'll do them in the discussion. The final element is what's referred to as the lover. Again, we're not sure as we're having these conversations with men and with boys, we're going to be doing over the next year or so. All of these headings will change. So at the moment, we're calling this one the lover. So in the lover is self-aware, is empathic, connects with others, is relational, is passionate and sensual. So again, when Hilton was speaking about, being aware and connecting with others, in my mind, this is the lover, and it's someone who uses their connectivity with others and their environment, their communities for the betterment of that community. Again, the other sides of the lover is what is quite often in Moore's work. Moore said that the lover, the active side in the bottom of the triangle is quite addictive. So that is impulsive. They're not grounded in anything. They'll jump from one situation to the next. And that means that they only think in the present. It's that immediate self-gratification. And again, if we use the heading of lover, we might say maybe that some of the men that we work with and support who may have levels of loneliness and isolation crave contact, but they don't know how to build relationships. So what they then experience are series of emotional contacts, but not the depth of relationship that they may be seeking. And then finally, the other aspect is what's called the feeble part of the lover. This person, that part lacks enthusiasm, is bored and quite often depressed. So that is the lover who may need to be reassured quite a lot within their relationships. I'm aware that that's a lot, people. I really am. So forgive me. What we've just gone through, usually you would go through probably 3 years on a degree course. So if you're still awake, you've done really, really well. Okay. As I said, I will share some links with Renee, but do note down any things that popped into your mind and we can reflect as a whole group.
Thank you so much for that. I guess I have a question about that too, right? Because I do think that this theory is quite interesting. So I've jotted my note down and I'll ask a question too. So again, just being mindful of time. So thank you so much for your answers for question 2. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the next question. Okay. So this is quite related to the first question. So we probably skimmed through this quite quickly, but from your experience, in particularly working in Cayman, are there any concerns you have noticed regarding men's mental health that could benefit from more awareness and education? Example, any particular mental health disorders? So I'm going to start off with Cottrell for this because him and I had an interesting conversation about this. Okay. So Cottrell,
Sorry. Sorry. For me, what I've observed a lot is that I observed a high portion of personality disorders, particularly in the men here, more from like the antisocial, narcissistic component. A lot of this is quite prevalent here. Now, when it comes to personality disorders, in particular, a lot of it is born out of, say, trauma, for example. Um, Argumentatively here, whilst there's trauma as well, I think there's also the point where the men are being spoiled during their younger years, spoiled, feeling like they can just get anything they want, this entitlement, believing things come easy. When it gets to a certain age, when that trend continues, it becomes very, it comes off very, I guess, a bit narcissistic at times, right? And then it's fueled, and it's not corrected. And when it's brought to the attention, it's, that lack of insightfulness, that lack of, empathy that you can have, that lack of reflective component is very limited. And then it disrupts their relationship with others, their relationships, and they find it difficult how to connect with others as well. And of course, there's also the borderline personality that is, I observe that has been more in particular with women here, but with men, I do find a lot of personality disorders are quite, it's quite evident here. I mean, you'll see it if you're in the field, just based on observation in certain language that are used in certain behaviors and actions. And you can see it a lot in the prison as well, just based on the clientele that I work with, and the conversations, and the groups that I've sat in on. So yeah, that's my piece on that real quick.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'll go to Hilton for this too, right? Because considering that you both work in at the same place, Hilton, is that something that you noticed too within working in that setting as well as other settings that you've worked in? Or is there something
Absolutely.
you want to
Uh,
add to that?
yeah, so absolutely. So with Cottrell, I'm 100% on board with that. But I want to highlight something slightly different, and that is substance use disorder, and in particular, what we call dual diagnosis. Pretty much people with a substance use disorder and a mental health problem. And what I think could benefit from awareness and education is helping young men to develop real coping skills and issues around resilience. Because what I've found is that the most problematic individuals that we have ever had to deal with are those who have substance use disorder and a mental health problem. They cycle in and out of prison. In fact, which is quite unfortunate, I declare a few of them disabled. And these are young people who are in their mid 30s, some probably heading to 40s. And I declare them disabled because they are never sober enough, long enough to be able to maintain a job, to be able to become responsible, etc. And the moment they leave prison, by the way, they come prison, get some respite, they look really well, and they are great. And 2 weeks out of prison, you see that person on the road, and it is not the same person. And so that in particular, I think we need to work on, but work backwards in terms of helping young men to deal with, again, like I said, issues of rejection, helping men to start being comfortable and talking about their trauma, because a lot of substance use is about numbing, is about escaping. It's really about soothing whatever they're experiencing, and they tend to take that quicker route, versus being able to understand that things happen to them that are painful. But then how do we engage in a process where we can really examine that so that they can come out at the better at the other end? Because it is so much of a problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, for sure. I do agree with what has been said by both you and Cottrell. Just adding a little bit more to working within the community too. You do see a lot of the substance use, or misuse, I should say. And again, that is a quicker way to cope with what you're going through, right? Like it's looking at short-term gain versus long-term pain, right? Versus short-term pain versus long-term gain. So, and again, it's normalized to for men to go, oh, I'm gonna go get a drink after work, right? It's normalized in that way. Sometimes it's encouraged even, right? So yeah, so looking at that too, I'm going to get Willis to answer a little bit because he works within the counseling center, so that's community based. So Willis, what do you think about this question? Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, I bold, underline, triple score everything that's been said just before. What I would add on top of the dual diagnosis, so mental health, substance misuse, there are those individuals within our communities who have neurodivergence, and these. So when we think about COVID, for example, there's a generation of young people who went through periods of isolation, had to distance themselves, and all sorts of different things. And what they didn't have was the opportunity to build those social skills that would have enabled them to navigate their lives as they're growing. So what we then have is an increase in the neurodivergent population, ADHD, ASD, etc. And so we wouldn't have seen that before. The pandemic amplified that when everyone came back out of lockdowns. The other thing I would add is that there's something really fundamental about, men and prison settings, for example. The many men that I used to work in category B prisons within the UK, which is like they're medium to high secure. And the majority of, well, a large number of the men that came through those gates were men who had witnessed childhood domestic violence, sexual abuse, physical, emotional abuse. And what they did, they reenacted that in their childlike state. So they didn't grow into men, as we would say, and they were acting that out. So I think there is definitely something about our work being trauma informed when we're delivering whatever services they are. There's a point that was made about being spoiled. Again, I get that. And within the model I described earlier, that spoiling was in the lover and the craving part. What they crave is an immediate fix. They don't have the resilience to stay with the pain and build resilience from the inside. They absorb it in from the environment or from others. And what we find is people who are diagnosed or demonstrate traits of, let's say, personality disorders or EUPD, emotionally unstable personality disorders, they tend to have a lot of professionals in their lives because they cannot maintain or generally do not maintain relationships with others because their needs are on extremes. They need you so much now and then they hate you the following day. And as professionals, we're paid to be in the role, so we're probably more reliable to be there. And so those resources within the community are challenged quite a lot. And you see the person coming today walk in the opposite direction. They don't answer the phone. And so we get the people coming back into prisons because what prison offers is a level of security and attachment. I know what I'm going to get in prison. The structure is there. I can function. So I agree with everything that's been said. And these are all the things that we see here within the community, within the counselling service. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Blah, 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 blah. No, I think that's everything. That's absolutely everything.
Great. Thank you all so much for that. I think that's really important to highlight for sure. Again, just being mindful of time, we do have one more slide of questions. So let me wrong slide. There we go. Okay. So I put two questions on one. So what are some positive changes have you seen regarding men's mental health? And then we're going to go into the second question. What tools, strategies, insights, or takeaways would you want the audience to lead with today in supporting their own mental health and others, especially when it comes to boys and men? So if one of you speak at a time, you can just answer both questions, okay? So I'm going to start off with Cottrell.
Okay. What are some positive changes have I seen regarding men's mental health? I guess from the media standpoint, I'm seeing it being talked about a bit more. than usual. I see there's a bit more promotion of it. There's also the side of, we are, as men, are trying to encourage more men to get into mental health, and encourage them to be more open about it. Other positive changes that I am aware of, even little programs I see that are encouraging even young adolescents, group programs to join. I think there's also, I think I mentioned it to a friend the other day, that I think Cayman facilitates a lot of programs for the younger youth to attend. They can be more, especially group programs that looks at, dealing with social skills, resilience, and building that within the community, especially for teens within their late adolescence. I think there's also a bit more of resources out there for them to hang on to. So, for example, the counseling center has a male therapist there. Also, you can go to other counseling places and find male therapists being present. So therefore, the younger guys may have a role model to look up to and go towards. You also have Alex Place, where if anything becomes too much, they can also go there as well. In terms of the strategies and any takeaways, in terms of the men, I would say if possible, we can try and be role models as much as possible. Just thinking about from a rehabilitative process, probably providing some psychosocial groups outside to even help men who are coming out of that and help them to socialize and try to normalize, because some of them, especially in prison, they come in 10 years ago and then they leave with the same mindset that they had 10 years later. So there's not much developmental growth mentally there. So some might come in as 18, leave as 30, but they still function and operating as a 19-year-old. So even from that perspective, and I think just adding more groups to the community will definitely help, and give a perspective of, I am not the only one. Also reduce this loneliness epidemic that's on the rise, reduce the connection that men have towards online and superficial beliefs, and increase more deeper connections with others, and also emphasize values, which is very important to how we develop and shape and how we present ourselves as role models, and also using the why, questioning why, how, what, and trying to deepen critical thinking, but in terms of the men in our society. That's a quick summary. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so I'm going to go to Hilton. Hilton, what would you say your answers are for these questions? What are some positive changes have you seen regarding men's mental health, and what strategies, insights, or takeaways would you want the audience to leave with today?
Similar to Cottrell, we are speaking of it more often, and it is important for us to broaden that. Um, so the mental health is now becoming a part of pop culture, and no one can really escape it. So, which is not always a good thing, but the awareness part of it is definitely good. Uh, in terms of strategy, men listen to other men. Men also want to be led by other men. So an important strategy is to educate men, and not always Cottrell and Willis with their eloquence. I'm talking about educating ordinary grassroots men, right? As long as they're decent, right? Educate them so that they can reach others. In the Caribbean, the barbershop is a very pivotal meetup spot where we talk all kind of foolishness. Right? So similarly, the education can occur there. So that's just one spot that we can look at, right? The next thing is generally is to generally talk with men. Um, from the general public, you can get involved in a number of trainings, and I must mention mental health first aid training through the Addison Kelly Education Fund. We'll be rolling that out sometime next year. So you continue to listen out for that. That's a very powerful program that's suited for all front lines, or just if you just want to inform yourself about mental health, etc. Two more things. It is important for us to invest in adult mentoring. In the substance use world, there's AA and NA, and they have sponsors. It is important for, and I'm not necessarily saying this organization, but they have a beautiful model that we can pull from. The one-to-one organization that mentors bigs and littles. What if we were to find, again, ordinary, upstanding men who are able to um, mentor young adults and other adult men in terms of mental health situations? I believe some time ago, one of our politicians may have mentioned something about a wellness garden, those kinds of strategies. It is also, I've seen strategies through APF, for example, but because you're primarily focused on youth, you have the very upbeat youth kind of, not just the forum, but those get together. It is important for us to also look at what other spaces that we can create for adults where we can actually talk about mental health. We can also use those persons who are comfortable talking about their own struggles and triumphs with mental health issues so that I can help to break the stigma, etc. So those are just some of the strategies for now. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And finishing up with Willis, what do you think for these two questions here, positive changes and strategies, insights, or takeaways?
Okay, so I'm going to try and not be too eloquent, Hilton. Okay, so I completely agree. And again, you see me throw my hands up because actually I think barbershops, I was saying it was just this morning, I said, I try and go every so often, but that is where I grew up. In the UK, that is where we hear the adult rites of passage, condoms are there, conversations are there, things are there. So why do we not have those as mental health touch spots where, and I think my thing would be, and I don't have the money, but I'm putting it out there, okay? My thing would be that those mental health first aiders, what if we had one or two in each of the barbershops? And that is a goal across all three of the islands, yeah? So everyone knows when they go in, they're going to be able to have a conversation. They're not going to have mental health support. They're accessing information. We have QR codes they can scan discreetly. They're in the loo, the restroom, or wherever they may be. And so there are all these different things. And I think it's about how men access information. And also, I'm thinking some of the positive change. I'm going back to the question. Some of the positive changes here in Cayman. A lot of the work that I do is with men. And quite often what I see is the men will come into the therapy room, they'll take their mask off, of what they put on, that masculinity that they put out to face the world, and they are themselves. They will recite poetry, they will play music. There's a couple of people even created music and brought it into the therapy room. So these are men who feel deeply but have to put it back on, be guarded to go back out into the world. And I think that in itself is a mental health difficulty that men experience. So there's something about men being able to be seen in all the shades of their complexions, not just one, not this monotone, this one-dimensional figure of what men can and can't be. I really could go on, but I know we need to stop, and other people have lives. So I'm gonna pause myself there, and as we go into whatever the questions may be, let's see where we get to. But thank you.
Thank you so much for that. One thing I will add to this too, right? Again, be mindful of time as well. Looking at our societal expectations of men too, especially I'm speaking from not trying to generalize all women, but from a woman's standpoint, challenging our implicit biases when we are engaging with men in terms of them expressing their emotional needs to us as well, right? So that's something that has to be receptive to. Like, it's not just, oh, let's allow men to speak. We also have to challenge ourselves. Can we allow men to speak? and provide that safe space for them too. So it's a whole population work. It's not just men forcing men to do what they need to do for their mental health. It's about us collectively. What can we do in order to generate that safe space for men as well? Yeah. Okay. So I looking at resources quickly too. Oh, this went quicker than expected. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time. I will definitely put the resources here. I have a QR code here just in case anyone wants to scan this. And if this is for all the resources, because we talked about resources today and not necessarily it being well known in the community. So this is a page for our resources. So feel free to scan this QR code. But again, if you can't, please visit the Alex Panton Foundation website at alexpantonfoundation.ky. And we have a list of public service providers, private service providers, as well as resources and info panels, international resources, and other things on our website as well. And then we have about 5 minutes to do some Q&As. So if you have any questions, feel free to say them now in our 5 minutes of wrapping up. Or if you want to type them as well. I'm going through the chat.
I'm sorry, I have a question, if that's okay. Let me put on my video. This is Adora. Hi, everyone. Firstly, guys, wow, thank you. This was so worth spending this hour with you all. It was so enlightening, such wonderful conversations, really excellent answers as well. So just backtracing even further back, I wonder what we can do to support our children, because everyone knows me as a children's entertainer. I'm very passionate about children. How can we start at the grassroots with children and supporting them, so that they are more emotionally aware? Because, boys are told, put on your big boy pants, no crying, boys don't cry, all of that. We need to change our dialogue, our conversation with little people.
Okay, Dora, thank you so much. And my take on it, I'm dual qualified children and adults therapist, and with children, young people, I think storytelling is an incredibly powerful way of doing things. And so this thing about using all cultures have stories about difficulties and overcoming difficulties. So it's things about using those stories within play or within any performances that you may be able to structure to encourage children to think and to maybe connect with some emotions and speak them out. So I think a lot can be done through play with young people and the expressive art. So again, using bodies as a way of communicating, just movement, and illustrating stuff about being overwhelmed and just how we are with children in the moment. And do you know what? What I find, if you ask a child what they think, they will tell you. They will tell you what their children often experience is adults and others believing that they know what is best. Yes, generally we do. However, children need to grow. And so asking them what their view is really important so we can correct it or help shape it in a more positive way rather than it just being this is the way it's done. So I think the arts.
Real quick, on a micro level, simply identifying feelings and feeding back. I am not, I'm a little bit upset because of what you said, and because of that, I'm sad, right? Or, oh, I'm really happy and excited today. So engaging with children in them identifying their feelings starts to help them to make that connection, because as we know, when those synapses start to fire off as they have their overall experiences, they are matching words to feelings and being able to identify these various kinds of emotions. So on a very small level, that is something that we can do as often as.
Yeah, I agree with both Mr. Hilton and Mr. Willis. Just my experience working with kids, one of the things too is, especially if they express a certain feeling, asking why do you feel that way? Increasing their emotional intelligence and making them reflect on why do I actually feel this way, and then having them to expound and elaborate on those feelings a bit, and using their language, right? And maybe using a little whatever what I used to use is like little faces depending on their language. Like a red face would represent anger, green face would be happiness. Those kind of structure to just help them to communicate. Yeah, there's more I can say on it, but short of time. So
Yeah, no, it's okay.
yeah.
Thank you so much for your answers for that. Thank you for asking that question, Isadora. I just want to point you all to the chat really quickly to complete the feedback survey so that if you got to log off, we really want to hear from you. And looking through the chat one more time, as someone said, Marilyn said football is a very popular space for men and boys as well. Perhaps a mental health first aid program could be extended to these spaces as well. Completely 100% agree, as well as looking at sports as a good way to help them regulate their emotions, right? They're having different mentors, different coaches, structure, but also play and moving their body that way that whatever stressors that they experience or traumas that they potentially hold, it can be released through exercising, right? And that's a note for all of us as well. Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll go, okay, because it is 2:01, so I am mindful of that. So we'll take one more question and then we'll go. Or if there's no more question, oh, okay, there is one in the chat. Okay. Someone shared in the chat, I think also it's important to seek help as a parent when you need it. Absolutely, because a lot of the behaviors and a lot of the emotional regulation skills does come from the parents. You have to model that behavior for your children and your young boys in particular, right? I find the Family Resource Center being very helpful in helping families deal with children with different challenges. The SNAP program is excellent, and other ADHD courses they have. Doing it as a family is best. I agree. I used to work there as well, so I understand the programs, and that's also the department that Mr. Willis works at. And I think each of us here on panel or discussion, we had an experience with working at the Department of Counseling Services. So yes, we agree with that 100%. It takes a whole family. The saying is, it takes a village, right? That is still true to this day. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up now. As I said, the feedback survey is in the chat as well as a QR code here. If anyone has any further questions or any other comments, feel free to email me at edu@alexpantonfoundation.ky or info@alexpantonfoundation.ky. And again, please visit our website at alexpantonfoundation.ky. And yeah, so thank you all so much for staying here for this whole entire hour. This is a conversation that can go on, but we're so grateful that you are here with us today. So thank you, hoping that you took away something. So happy International Men's Day, and thank you to our panelists again.
Thank you all. Good day.
Welcome. So, Willis,